Midway Battle Part 1. The Battle of Midway was a major naval battle that is considered the most important event in the Pacific War of World War II. The battle took place between June 4 and June 7, 1942, about a month after the Battle of the Coral Sea and 6 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The United States Navy decisively repelled the Imperial Japanese Navy's attack on Midway Atoll, resulting in incalculable losses and seizing the strategic initiative from the Japanese Navy. The Japanese attack, like the attack on Pearl Harbor, was intended to eliminate the United States as a strategic power in the Pacific, so that Japan can freely establish a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. The Japanese hoped that another defeat would demoralize the United States to the point that it could be forced to negotiate an end to the Pacific War on terms favorable to Japan. The Japanese plan was drawn up to lure the few United States aircraft carriers into a trap. The Japanese also intended to occupy Midway Atoll as part of a comprehensive plan to expand their defensive perimeter in response to the Doolittle air raid. This operation was considered preparation for the next Japanese attack on Fiji and Samoa. This plan was flawed due to Japan's incorrect assumptions about the United States' reaction and poor decision-making. American codebreakers succeeded in decoding the Japanese decryption of the date and location of the attack, and allowed the United States Navy to devise a surprise ambush plan. For Japanese aircraft carriers and the heavy cruiser were sunk, while the Americans lost an aircraft carrier and a destroyer. Heavy losses in the form of the sinking of 4 aircraft carriers and the death of a large number of airmen weakened the strength of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Japan could no longer match the speed of the United States in building warships and training new pilots. Previously, Japan quickly succeeded in realizing all its initial goals in the war, including taking over the Philippines, invading Malaya and Singapore, securing important resource areas on Java, Kalimantan and other islands in the Dutch East Indies. Preliminary planning for the second phase objectives began in early January 1942. However, effective strategy formulation was hampered by differences in strategy between the Imperial Army and Imperial Navy, and internal conflict between GHQ and Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's combined fleet. The next war strategy could only be finalized in April 1942. It was all thanks to the victory of the bureaucratic struggle that Admiral Yamamoto was able to lay down an operational concept that placed more emphasis on continued military operations in the Central Pacific than other plans. Yamamoto's plans included direct and indirect military operations aimed at Australia and the Indian Ocean. In the end, Yamamoto indirectly threatened to resign if he failed to implement the agenda he had prepared. Yamamoto's main concern was the remaining American aircraft carriers, and according to him they should be destroyed because they were the main obstacle to the success of the overall military campaign. This concern was clearly proven after the Doolittle air raid on Tokyo, April 18, 1942, carried out by Yuzov B-25 planes from the aircraft carrier USS Hornet. Although considered militarily insignificant, these air attacks shocked the Japanese psychologically and demonstrated the weakness of the air defenses around Japan's main islands. The only way to eliminate this threat is to sink the United States aircraft carrier and seize Midway, the only strategic island in the eastern Pacific besides Hawaii. Yamamoto argued that military operations against the major carrier base at Pearl Harbor would reduce the United States' ability to wage war. However, given the strength of American air power based on Hawaii, he decided that American bases could not be attacked directly. Instead, Yamamoto chose Midway, located at the northwestern tip of the Hawaiian Islands chain, about 1,300 miles (2,100 kilometers) from Oahu. Midway was not particularly important in the Japanese plan of action, but the Japanese felt the United States would consider Midway an important outpost of Pearl Harbor and would therefore be defended vigorously. The United States did consider Midway an important outpost. After the battle ended, the establishment of a United States submarine base at Midway allowed Pearl Harbor-based submarines to refuel and supplies, and extended their operating radius to 1,200 miles (1,900 kilometers). An airfield on Midway served as a forward staging point for bomber attacks on Wake Island. Yamamoto's plan. Midway Atoll, several months before the battle. In the photo, to the front is East Island, airfield, behind it slightly to the west is the larger Sand Island. As with Japanese naval war planning during World War II, Yamamoto's battle plans were extremely complex. In addition, Yamamoto's plan was based on optimistic intelligence data, and counted the USS Enterprise and USS Hornet, both forming Task Force 16, as the remaining aircraft carriers for the United States Pacific Fleet at that time. The aircraft carrier USS Lexington had already been sunk, while the USS Hornet was heavily damaged, and the Japanese believed to have been sunk, at the Battle of the Coral Sea a month earlier. The Japanese also knew that the USS Saratoga was undergoing repairs on the west coast after suffering damage from a torpedo hit from a submarine. Most important, however, was Yamamoto's belief that the United States was already demoralized by the successive defeats of the previous 6 months. Yamamoto thought he could lure the United States fleet into a fatal situation. He scattered his ships, especially his battleships, so that there was very little chance of his ships being discovered by American ships before the battle took place. Yamamoto's battleships and cruisers would trail Admiral Nagumo Chuchi's carriers by several hundred miles. The Japanese fleet was intended to destroy all ships in the U.S. fleet approaching Midway, once they had been sufficiently weakened by the carrier attacks under Nagumo's command, and ready to be finished in a midday gun duel, as was the common battle doctrine of most navies in the world. Unbeknownst to Yamamoto, the United States had cracked the Japanese naval code, called JN-25 by the United States. Yamamoto's emphasis on scattered ship formations also meant that ship formations could not help each other. Although carriers were expected to be the backbone of the attack and should be able to withstand American counterattacks, the only battleships far larger than the destroyers protecting Nagumo's fleet were 2 battleships and 3 cruisers. In fact, Yamamoto and Kondo's fleet still had 2 light aircraft carriers, 5 battleships, and 6 cruisers, but none of them were sent to Midway. The long distance between the escort ships and the aircraft carrier also had a serious impact on the battle. The large warships in Yamamoto's and Kondo's fleets carried reconnaissance aircraft that Nagumo could not use. Invasion of the Aleutian Islands. Japanese military operations in the Aleutian Islands, abbreviated as Operation AL stands for Aleutian Islands, also reduced the number of ships that could actually be used to attack Midway. While previously history books often referred to the Aleutian operation as Japan's attempt to deceive and invite the arrival of United States warships, more recent research results reveal that the Aleutian operation was actually planned to be launched simultaneously with the attack on Midway. However, a one-day delay in the journey of Nagumo's task force meant that the naval operation was launched a day earlier than the Midway attack.